All right, so the next example we're going to look at is going to allow us to send email reminders for a periodic task that needs to be completed. So the use case here was one of our customers had a process where they have to send materials out to their customers, and sometimes they have to do it once a year, sometimes twice a year, sometimes 4 times a year. It varies based on customer. And so they needed a place to track how often they were sending those updates to everyone, when the last time they were sent, and then of course the natural next step was to do a reminder of when it was time to send the next reminder or the next materials. So what we did in this scenario is we added a series of fields. First of all, they weren't sending these updates to everybody, so there's a checkbox to indicate who's actually receiving these periodic updates. And then if that's checked, there's a couple of dependent fields that pop up. First, a drop-down field to mark the frequency, annually, biannually, or quarterly. And then a date field to track the last time that an update was sent. As we were working on building out this process, in terms of some design thoughts, obviously this process can start when that box first gets checked. That might be a new account that's just being input into Sugar, or it might be an existing account where someone's going to start receiving the updates. So just like Justin's workflow had 2 start events, this one will need 2 start events as well. This one also needs a way to automatically exit out of the workflow process if someone no longer needs to receive these updates. So if that box gets unchecked, we're going to need a mechanism in our workflow process to immediately stop the process and not make any future reminders to send them updates. We'll need to figure out when to send the next reminder, and then we'll have to wait for that date, that time, before we send an email reminder that it's time to send the next update. I'm also going to emphasize in both of my examples today thinking about exceptions to the workflow process. This is something that, as I've built out more workflows and more complex workflows, becomes really important in terms of making sure you've covered all your cases. So what's going to happen with this workflow process if someone checks the box but they don't put in a frequency, or they don't put in a date to start from as to when the last update date was sent? Now, if those fields are required, hopefully that wouldn't happen, but something to make sure you're thinking about, either by making those fields required and or by allowing for that within your workflow process. This workflow process is going to have to happen repeatedly. So first of all, someone might just go in and update that last sent date independent of when an email reminder has been set, because maybe they decide to do it early for whatever reason. And second of all, once an update is sent, we need to go back and start over, because we're going to have to send another update in the next quarter or the next year, whatever that time period was. And then something else to think about, I'll talk more about this at the end, what should happen after we send the reminder? Do we need to follow up to see if they actually did anything with it? Do we just assume that we sent the reminder and we're good to go? How do we want to handle that in our workflow process? So in order to build this process in a timely fashion during this demo, I have done a little bit of pre-work for us. Besides coming up with that process design, I've also created a hidden field that's going to track the next reminder date. When does that next update need to get sent? And I've also created a process email template that I'll use for my email reminders. I'll take a quick look at that when I pull up my screen here, but I did most of that work already, or all of that work already. I just want to take a quick second to show you that. So here I am in the process email templates module inside of Sugar, and I've got a number of different email templates set up here, but the one that we'll use in this workflow is this periodic update reminder. So if I go ahead and design that really quickly, you can see the email builder for the workflows is hopefully what you'd expect. It allows you to set the subject and the body of the email that you're going to send, and it gives you a mechanism for inserting variables where you want to insert data from Sugar into that message body or subject by clicking the gear button here. That'll bring down a list of all of the fields that you can add, and you just pick the fields you want to insert. You can also insert a link to the Sugar record using this Sugar link icon there. So that's pretty straightforward. We're going to jump over to the process definitions module and go ahead and create our workflow process here. So I'll give this a name. My target module here will be accounts, so nothing for me to update there. And as Justin said, we always want to build this in disabled status and then go ahead and enable it once it's done. Okay, so again, just like Justin's process here, I'm going to need 2 start events, one for new account and one for updates to existing accounts. Each of these is going to have the start condition. So new records, we'll look at that checkbox field, which is called send periodic updates in the accounts module. Send periodic updates equal to true. And it looks like for some reason this is getting cut off on the bottom of my screen here, so that's going to make life interesting. There we go, add. And then we'll do the same thing in the other one, except for this is going to apply to all records only. I'm going to do the all updates option here because I'm going to use the changes to option, which is only available under all updates. So same field, send periodic updates. I will do changes to true this time. And again, see if I can maneuver this so I can click that add button. Okay. All right. The next thing that I am going to do in my workflow processes is I'm actually going to provide the mechanism for that early exit condition. So I need my workflow process to constantly be watching to find out if that box gets unchecked. Now I'm going to have my workflow process doing multiple things at once. It's going to go through the rest of the steps in order to send the reminder emails, but it's also going to do this waiting. So I'm going to use a parallel gateway for that. Parallel gateway is going to allow me to specify multiple next steps and do all of them. So for my early exit condition, I need to use a receive message event or action here. That's going to allow me to tell the workflow to wait for something to happen. In this case, what I'm going to wait for is for that box to be unchecked. And I'll configure that wait message event, or receive message event, I should say, to say exactly that. If the send periodic update changes to unchecked, then we're going to go ahead and just terminate our process. The terminate process versus the do nothing, the difference here is do nothing means other branches would keep running. That's not what we want to happen here. We actually want the process to terminate and stop running at that point. So I changed that to a terminate process end event there. Okay, so we've taken care of our early exit condition. Now we can worry about the actual meat of our process here. Like I said, what we're going to have to do here is first figure out when we need to send that next reminder email. That is going to vary based off of that frequency. How often are we sending them? So what I'm going to have to do is have a gateway to check the frequency so that I can figure out how much time to add to the last update date or the last send date before I send the next update. So here I'm going to need 3 different options coming off of this gateway because there's 3 possible time periods here. And I'm going to use the update action here to set the date to 1 year later, 6 months later, or 3 months later. Now these actions will all look remarkably similar other than the fact that we're doing that different time period. So in all 3 of these actions, we're going to be updating that hidden field called next update date. And we're going to set that to the last update set date plus the relevant time span, in this case 1 year. In this case, oops, there it is, 6 months. And in the last case, 3 months. That was something funky there. What did I click on? And so each of these actions, oops, it looks like I missed the plus button there. Each of these actions are updating the same field, they're just setting that date slightly differently based off that time period. So I'll connect each of those to my gateway here. And I think it's time for me to give up on making this look pretty. And then I need to set up that gateway to tell when to take each branch. So the 1 year later will be if that update frequency is equal to annually. 6 months later will be, of course, if it's equal to biannually. I may have to adjust my zoom here and see if that helps with my save button issue there. There we go. And then the last one will be that quarterly frequency. Still, really? The screen share, I think, is messing with my screen size there. There we go. Okay. All right. Since I'm only going to do one of these three things before I move on to the next step, best practice from Sugar is to have a converging gateway after that to bring those steps back together and figure out what happens next. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a quick converging gateway to bring those three actions back together. Strictly speaking, in my experience, this isn't necessarily necessary, but I have seen a few workflows have issues if you skip it, so I've tried to go ahead and follow Sugar's recommendation there and start using them. And after that, I'm actually going to split things off again. So from here, once again, there's two things I'm going to ask the workflow process to do, so I'm going to need another parallel gateway. This time, one of the branches will do the email reminder, and the other one, again, is going to do some monitoring for me because I want to be aware of any updates to that last set date. So let's go ahead and do the email reminder piece first. I think that's the kind of simpler conceptually piece, even though it's actually more steps here in the workflow process. If I need to send that email reminder, I've figured out when to send it. I've set a date field inside of Sugar to when I want to send it. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a wait condition to wait until that date. Now I could also have done 3 different wait conditions here. The reason I did do that because I want to do that monitoring for that date change as well. It just made more sense to do it this way for me. So we're going to wait for the next update date. And once that hits, we're going to send our email reminder. We'll pick our email template and then who we want to send that to. In this case, we'll just send it to the account assigned user. And then we need to wait to see if the date gets changed. So we'll go ahead and put another receive message in here. And go ahead and monitor for the last update set date to be changed. Now I also want to monitor for that date to be changed, again, before the email reminder gets set. So I'm going to have that other parallel branch that just looks at that date changed. And this is going to look exactly the same as that other one. It's just waiting to see if that date gets changed. I'm going to have another converging gateway here to bring those two branches back together. And then this is where I'm going to loop back to the beginning of my process. Once it gets here, the date has changed. We're ready to figure out again when to send the next reminder. So I'm going to loop all the way back to checking the frequency and figuring out when to send the next reminder. Save that process. And I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my slides here.
We just had a question come in. So I know you can create new records and process definitions, but can you reassign currently existing records to relate fields? So a use case would be when lead equals converted, relate all calls currently related to the lead to the account instead, so calls aren't forgotten about if in the lead once it's converted to an account and contact.
There is actually an administrator configuration setting that would allow you to move the calls to the converted contact instead of leave them under the lead. I don't think that's something that Advanced Workflow could currently do. Advanced Workflow has some pretty significant limitations still around working with relationships and related records. So only certain relationships can be accessed through Advanced Workflow. We actually saw an example of that with Justin's example with the call guest relationship. So that is something that Sugar is continuing to work on and to allow for more relationships. It's actually in their roadmap for the next couple of releases, but currently I think your best bet towards that use case would be to explore the configuration setting, which is under System Settings. All right, so to wrap up, a couple of final comments on this periodic updates workflow example. First of all, Justin's workflow was really simple to test. All he had to do was create a task to test that workflow example. So we went ahead and he did that for you to show you that process. This one obviously is going to be a little bit more work to test, and it's going to be made much more complicated by the fact that I've got some really long wait periods in my workflow process. To really fully test this workflow process, I'd have to wait a year to see if it worked. Well, that's not very useful to me when I'm trying to test something. So one of the things that I will do when I'm testing a workflow process like this is I'll use much shorter wait periods while I'm testing, initially at least, and then I'll go back and change them to the correct wait periods before deploying the workflow. One other thing that I would think about while testing this workflow process is I'm using a hidden field in this workflow to do that next send date. While I'm testing, I would probably show that field on the screen so that I could make sure that was getting set correctly, especially if something isn't working right with my workflow when I test it. I'd want to be able to track, did that date get set appropriately? Is that where the issue's happening, or is there something else wrong with my workflow process? And then, this workflow process was designed this way in part because of the specifications of the customer I was building it for. Obviously, we could have used tasks inside of Sugar for the reminders here instead of sending an email. The nice thing about tasks is maybe that would then allow me to see when the task was closed to know that it was done. The update frequency in their example was 3 different time periods, annually, biannually, or quarterly, but you could have had something like an integer field for a number of days or number of months instead of a drop-down field, or you could have more options on that drop-down field. In this example, next update date was a hidden field, but it doesn't have to be hidden. It's something that you could actually show on the screen. It might be useful for reports, for filters. So just because, this example hid that field doesn't mean it would have to be hidden.